The Black Hills are a mountain range located in western South Dakota and northeastern Wyoming, covering approximately 5,000 square miles or 13,000 square kilometers. They had long been a sacred place to the native Lakota people, as well as a key source of wild game for them. In 1868, the United States government signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie that gave ownership of the Black Hills to the Native Americans of the region and banned the settlement of non-indigenous people there. However, by the mid-1870s, the Panic of 1873 had brought economic hardship upon the U.S. There had been rumors of gold located in the Black Hills for decades. Public opinion throughout the Midwest and western portions of the U.S. was that such gold could help to lessen hard times. In their minds, it was only fair for it to be extracted from the Black Hills if it existed, since the local Native American tribes did not value it and were nomadic with no permanent settlements in them. Additionally, Western businessmen were excited about the profits that a gold rush could bring, given the need for equipment, animals, and transportation that it would generate. However, there is substantial opposition to encroachment into the Black Hills from the population of the eastern U.S. and white advocates for Native Americans. Many of them recognize the value the Black Hills provided for Native Americans, not only in terms of hunting, but also in the deep aesthetic and somewhat spiritual connection they felt with the land. In 1874, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer began preparations for an expedition to the Black Hills. Construction crews on the Union Pacific and Northern Pacific Railroads had been suffering from attacks by Native American tribes, which also contributed to the poor economic climate in the country. Custer's expedition had the stated mission of scouting for potential locations for a fort in the Black Hills to defend against further Native American offensives. Beyond this, he would also conduct a reconnaissance of them, as his party would be some of the first non-indigenous people to traverse and map them. Finally, though it was not explicitly stated, it was generally understood that one of Custer's objectives was to determine whether gold existed there. Custer's expedition faced pushback from the native Sioux people and their allies, who argued that it violated the Treaty of Fort Laramie. However, U.S. Army leadership approved it regardless, under the argument that the treaty contained exceptions for federal government military forces. On July 2nd, Custer's forces set out for the Black Hills from Fort Abraham Lincoln in the central portion of what is now the state of North Dakota. His expeditionary force consisted of between 1,000 and 1,200 men and included not only U.S. Army cavalry, but also several miners, scientists, news correspondents, and around 75 Native American scouts. He planned to take 2 months to complete the trip to the Black Hills, the reconnaissance of them, and the return to Fort Lincoln. One major challenge that Custer faced was related to the food supply for his expedition. Feeding the people on the expedition would likely not be a problem, given that they could hunt wild game along the way and that they had brought a herd of beef cows along as well. However, maintaining an adequate supply of feed for the horses and mules worried the expedition's leadership, especially if grass conditions along the route were poor and wild forage wasn't available in large enough quantities. Custer's forces would have difficulty with blazing a route through the Black Hills. Any paths that existed were not large enough to accommodate his long train of heavy wagons. His forces would have to remove boulders and vegetation to follow them. Additionally, streams and canyons posed one of the most significant challenges to the progress of the expedition. If the stream could be forded, its banks would be cut in a manner to allow the wagons to move down one of the banks, across the stream, and back up the other. If this was not possible, a bridge would have to be built using brush, stone, and extra poles that the expedition carried with them. However, the size of and engineering experience present in his expeditionary force would enable him to surmount these challenges with effort. The expedition's travel across the Great Plains was mainly dictated by the available resources, namely water, forage for the animals, and wood. However, these would be in much greater abundance once they entered the Black Hills. The march for each day would usually be from one source of water to another, as these were limited on the Great Plains, and only a minor amount of it could be carried by the expedition. The expedition also suffered from the summer heat and sun as they traveled across the Great Plains given that temperatures rose to above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 38 degrees Celsius, and that there was little shade available. The Native American scouts were usually at the front of the expedition, guided both by their knowledge of the land and a general heading towards the Black Hills made by the chief engineer of the expedition, Captain William Ludlow, each morning. The expedition almost entirely did not follow set roads or paths, as none existed. Almost all of the region between Fort Lincoln and the Black Hills was unmapped, along with the Black Hills themselves. Custer would often take charge of determining the route of the expedition, riding off with a small group and identifying that night's campsite a few hours before the main portion of it arrived. On July 18th, the expedition arrived at the Belle Fourche River, near the border of the present-day states of Wyoming and South Dakota, and had their first sighting of the Black Hills, later entering them on the 24th. It was able to traverse the Great Plains in a set of 4 parallel columns, but had to reduce to a single line upon entering the narrow canyons of the Black Hills, creating a wagon train around 2 miles long. The expedition encountered several dozen of the native Lakota people on the 26th, learning that there were few other Native Americans in the Black Hills at the time, and that they had it mostly to themselves. On July 31st, the expedition reached the base of Black Elk Peak, the tallest mountain in the Black Hills, the state of South Dakota, and east of the Rocky Mountains. Custer, Captain William Ludlow, and a few others summited it, becoming the first American settlers to do so. A pivotal moment came on August 2nd, when the expedition had set up camp along a stream named French Creek. The miners began to explore it in search of gold, which they found in limited quantities upon digging along the stream's banks. The next day, Custer sent a solo rider to the nearest outpost with a telegraph station, Fort Laramie, to spread the news, with it reaching Western newspapers by mid-August. Custer scouted the Black Hills to its southern edge along the Cheyenne River in early August. The expedition began its return to Fort Lincoln on August 6th, having accomplished all of its major objectives. On August 7th, Custer shot and killed a bear as a trophy. The expedition left the Black Hills on August 14th. The return trip across the Great Plains proved challenging, as for unknown reasons large sections of prairie were burned, leaving little edible forage for the animals. By August 27th, they had reached much more fertile prairie, and by August 30th, they were back at Fort Lincoln. The expedition had taken approximately 883 miles, with many long days of 25 to 30 miles traveled during it. Miners came from all across the country to the Black Hills, including first-generation immigrants escaping the slums of eastern cities and miners from the western states and territories who had been unsuccessful during previous gold rushes across them. As word of the gold discovery spread throughout 1874 and 1875, the U.S. Army tried to block prospectors and businessmen from settling in the Black Hills, including evicting them when discovered there and intercepting them en route and destroying their possessions, though they knew that it was a losing effort. Some prospectors attempted to sneak into the Black Hills from Wyoming by crossing the Platte River. One of the first organized groups to enter the Black Hills in order to mine gold arrived there on December 23, 1874, creating a small stockade and 7 log cabins, but they were removed by the U.S. Army in April 1875. By mid-1875, around 800 miners were in the Black Hills, mining for gold and staking out claims. The U.S. Army left the Black Hills that winter and ended any effort to prevent prospectors from entering. By January 1876, around 4,000 miners were located there, and the town of Custer, containing 1,000 people, had sprung up along French Creek, the area of initial gold discovery during the 1874 expedition. Initial mining efforts centered around French Creek and the southern Black Hills until richer deposits were discovered on the northern side in Deadwood Gulch. This occurred in August 1875, when gold was found there near the future location of the town of Deadwood. The torrent of prospectors began to arrive in Deadwood in the spring of 1876, coming both from other portions of the Black Hills and other states and territories. All of the productive claims in the gulch were marked by the end of January 1876, so many of the new arrivals purchased such claims or spread out into neighboring gulches. The peak of the gold rush in the Deadwood area came in the spring of 1877 as new prospectors continued to arrive. Around 12,000 people lived within the 10-mile radius of Deadwood by that October, making the region around it the center of mining and commercial activity in the Black Hills. Within Deadwood, there was not only housing for miners, but also rapid growth of small businesses to serve their needs, like doctors, hardware stores, and various forms of entertainment. Several famous figures of the Wild West resided there for periods of their lives, like Calamity Jane, Wild Bill Hickok, and Seth Bullock. However, most of the profitable claims in the area around Deadwood had been created by the summer of 1877, causing the amount of new arrivals to substantially decrease. By 1880, 22 settlements had sprung up in the Black Hills. Deadwood numbered around 4,000 at that time. However, towns could fade away just as rapidly as they grew. For instance, Custer peaked in population at around 6,000 people in the spring of 1876, having been the first substantial settlement in the Black Hills. However, in late May of that year, news came to the town of the boom occurring around Deadwood, and its population dropped to around 100 in just a few weeks as many of its residents hurried to move there. The first stagecoach line to the Black Hills began operation on January 27, 1876, running from Cheyenne in the Wyoming Territory to Custer, a one-way trip of 179 miles. On September 25th, the line was extended to Deadwood. This Cheyenne to Deadwood line came to carry not only passengers, but also gold. In 1878, its owners made two specially built coaches, lined with steel plates, which, along with 8 guards, provided protection for the gold. It was only robbed once. The first railroad in the Black Hills was a 20-mile-long one built in 1881 by the Homestake Mining Company to move timber for mining use. The first rail connection from within the Black Hills to outside of it came in 1885 when a line opened between Rapid City and Omaha, Nebraska. Much of the gold mining during the gold rush took place in the area between the towns of Custer and Deadwood, roughly 50 miles north to south. This area included 38 gulches, all of which had at least moderate amounts of gold. The gold mining in the Black Hills was less profitable than in other portions of the country, given that there were fewer claims available and that the amount of gold in each claim was less plentiful. A gulch is a V-shaped valley, usually dozens to hundreds of feet deep, that contains a stream or dry stream bed at its base, often with steep sides leading down to it. The initial gold mining that took place in the Black Hills involved extracting placer gold, which is small gold nuggets interspersed with rocks and soil deposited over time by flowing water. Such placer gold could usually be found within 3 different portions of the gulches of the Black Hills: the existing stream beds, one set of deposits around 20 vertical feet upslope from the gulch's base, and another set between 100 and 300 feet upslope. The lower set of deposits could be mined by creating a channel further upstream that diverted water to them, while the higher set required carrying water up to the deposits or bringing the earth from them down to the stream at the gulch's base. Many miners could work individually or in small groups to extract gold ore, given that it was close to the surface. The only tools required for its removal at that scale were usually a shovel and pickaxe. Placer mining during the gold rushes of the 1800s usually employed one of 3 methods that used water to separate gold out from soil, rock, and other materials. First, miners could engage in panning, where they placed ore extracted from a placer deposit into a large metal pan along with water, then shook it vigorously. The denser gold would separate out from the other materials and settle to the bottom of the pan. A second method was the rocker box, a wooden box usually a few feet in length, width, and depth, into which ore and water could be placed. The box would then be tilted back and forth to separate out the gold. Rocker boxes were still portable, but had a higher yield than panning. The final method was the sluice box, an open-top box into which ore could be poured. Flowing water running through the box would separate out the denser gold using ridges running along its bottom. Sluice boxes could range in length from a few to dozens of feet, with longer sluice boxes being the largest and most permanent option for placer gold mining. Given the essential nature of flowing water to gold extraction, miners would sometimes create flumes, artificial open channels of water that are often elevated to bring it from one location to another. For instance, in the early 1880s, a 17-mile-long flume was built and used to bring water to a dry mining location that was otherwise quite profitable. The peak of the gold rush was from approximately 1876 to 1880. The economy of the Black Hills gradually turned from small-scale mining to organized industrial operations throughout the 1880s as the placer deposits of gold were extinguished and only low deposits, those much deeper beneath the surface and embedded in rock, thus requiring large-scale mining operations and equipment, remained. Many of the towns in the Black Hills that had sprung up in the mid-1870s lost their rough, frontier character and developed a more upstanding reputation. The most significant mining company in the Black Hills was the Homestake Mining Company, or Homestake, located in Lead, which is 4 miles southwest of Deadwood. It was formed in the spring of 1877 when a promising mine there was sold to 3 entrepreneurs. The company rapidly acquired several mines nearby. By the late 1890s, it employed around 1,500 people. At its peak, Homestake accounted for 90% of the gold extracted from the Black Hills region. Additionally, it would produce 10% of the global gold supply over the next 125 years until it closed in 2002. In its early days, Homestake was known for using shady tactics to expand its empire. One example was its conflict over water access with a nearby mining company. Each company bought ditches transporting water that it thought the other might need. However, they had to prove some use for the water in order to retain their rights to it. The other company offered to supply the entire water needs of Deadwood for a year for free. Homestake matched this offer, and the 2 companies raced to construct water channels leading into the town. Homestake also secretly purchased a local newspaper to shift public opinion in their favor and collaborated with the existing water supplier for Deadwood. Around 10 to 15,000 voters participated in an election to choose which company should supply the town. There were several tricks pulled on the day of the election, with Homestake providing free champagne to voters and different groups of voters, each numbering in the hundreds, offering their votes to be sold to the highest bidder. Additionally, in the afternoon, the rival company concluded that it had more votes, so it packed the polling places with its supporters in order to block entry and prevent new votes from being cast. However, Homestake still won, and the rival company soon sold to it. Another example of Homestake's tactics in the late 1870s came when they sought to purchase a piece of property near Lead. Its owner asked for a very high price, which was not accepted by Homestake. He ignored threats from company thugs who later killed him. The murderers were found to be not guilty in court. Local gossip was that the jury members had received bribes from Homestake, with several suddenly displaying increased wealth, but nothing could be proven. Additionally, a police officer guarding the murderers while they were jailed claimed to have been offered a bribe of $5,000 in 1870s value in return for letting them go. Ultimately, the Black Hills Gold Rush left only a very limited number of prospectors wealthy, with the vast majority struggling to turn a substantial profit once transportation to the Black Hills, supplies, and labor were factored in. The gold rush did not provide the economic relief from the Panic of 1873 that many had hoped for. There were some limited benefits, as it provided temporary employment for thousands of miners and helped to boost the regional economy, but it did not substantially reduce the national debt or resolve unemployment at the national level, as some of the more optimistic prognosticators had hoped.